I invite the team to come forward. The first that we are going to have an opening remarks from the Dean of Humanities. So that's Professor Jacob Aluko. And then after that, we have welcome remarks by the President. Then after that, we have a presentation done by Mr. Ruben Ikuka here as well. And then we have a question and answer session. So please, even as you follow the presentation, keep the questions that you have in mind, and you can ask them once the question and answer session comes to you. Then after that, we have a vote of thanks by the president of the attraction here at UNZA, Ms. Nakashi Malumbe. And then we have closing remarks by Mr. Bright Chikonde from Transparency International. Then we have a closing prayer by another volunteer. So you can also prepare for that. So I'm now going to welcome the Dean of Humanities, Professor Aluko. Come forward.
Director of programs. Let me recognize partners that we have this afternoon coming under the handle of CIZ and also CIZ International. We have this very important discussion on corruption in perception index. As indicated, my name is Professor Jacob Aluko. I'm the Dean School of Humanities and Social Sciences. This is the school that has been asked as the most number of debates on and for the University of Zambia. This afternoon, I was asked to not only speak for the school, but the university. Professor has requested that I make some remarks on the university. So we are doing some double division where we are talking about the school as the biggest unit in the university, biggest in terms of number of students. You may know the University of Zambia about 10,000 students at the moment, and about a third of those are residents in the School of Humanities and Social Science. We have more than 80 programs that we run as a school. As a university, we have 19 units. We have 18, for example, this is School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Opportunity, Culture, Health Sciences, Public Health, Medicine, and Junior Capital Education, and children. All those together have 18. Then we have with directorates like computer directorate, other directorates like history. So altogether we have got 19 units. In this unit, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, yet a part where we can share a lot of topical matters like we're having today. And this is very good. Like this afternoon, we take note some now explaining how people are going to behave. If they perceive you as a good person, they will ultimately treat you as a good person. And the behavior is going to be tailored around how people perceive. And as a result of that, we are always glad to work with partners. And want to invite GIZ as and this is not the last time you have to interact. We interacted with the local branch, and we are saying that we are also looking forward to have a lot of interaction even with other international branches that we have in the region, so that we can share notes as an institution and also as a unit. So feel free that you can use our facility as the University of Zambia. We are very open. Just this morning, we had other meetings. We had other meetings with other partners who are wanting to collaborate with us. And it means that this platform is available to each and everyone. And plus everyone is accessible to this place. Meaning, if you have a niche which the University of Zambia is not doing very much, engage us, and then we'll create that niche as a program which we can do together. And we're excited. Again, I want to welcome all of you and feel free to deliberate in this very important program. Thank you.
So now we're going to have coming remarks by Transparency International Zambia Executive Director.
Good afternoon, ladies and fellow institutions. Okay, I would like to the general allow me to our presenter today, Mr. Ruben. Very well. He was vice chair at and many other so today is going to us again wearing another hat. He is the chairperson of the International Anti-Corruption Conference. So it is international. So you'll be speaking to us about, I don't know, maybe you tell us about many other things that we'll leave it with him. Allow me to acknowledge that our members, we have Mr. Adam Dazzle, and then we have Mr. Michael Peter, Peter. Mr. Peter, and then we also have the team from TIZ. Let me just have this nice to add so that they can. Okay, so that's the team from TIZ. So but the TIZ, we are very excited to this interaction and this engagement. Today we're going to be doing a lecture which is going to be delivered by Mr. Peter. And the topic, as you may have known, is the 2023 Corruption Perceptions Index and what implications that has. So our hope for doing this is that we're going to have a very fruitful engagement with you. And I don't know how many of you know much about the CPI, but in having this interaction today, we are hoping that we are going to have a very fruitful interaction where you are going to ask questions to clarify and also maybe just to make your own contributions about the things that you are going to hear today. So for us, this is part of our ongoing efforts to keep this conversation because we launched in January, but we want to keep the conversation alive, the issues that we are alive in public discourse. And we think that coming to a place like this and having this interaction is one more of keeping the conversation going. Well, that during the question and answer session after the presentation, we are going to get a lot of questions and a lot of submissions from you guys so that we can together consider and look at ways to improve the corruption situation in this country. Is that good for everyone? So, without further ado, allow me now to invite our presenter for this afternoon, Mr. Come and get. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me at the back. I'm sure we'll get the sound system going. I've seen some backbenchers. The backbenchers don't want to be in front, or is it an excuse to escape? Someone said yes, they want to escape. Great. So we're going to talk about the CPI. I'm hoping that a number of you have heard about the CPI, not the Consumer Price Index, but the Corruption Perception Index. Because people confuse the CPI with the Consumer Price Index with the Corruption Index. So what I hope we're going to do this afternoon, I can get this point. Has looked So I want us to look at the basics of the CPI. What's the definition of the CPI? I want us to look at the data sources for the CPI. We're going to address the methodology that we use the CPI. And then we'll talk about the findings. They have the findings at the global level, as well as the findings from Zambia and the look at the Zambia. All right? You can all hear me at the back? Great. I'll try and shout as much as I can. So firstly, I have to do something. Great. Let's start with the audience. We all agree that there is a problem of corruption in Ghana. That's true. And this problem has now become more entrenched and institutionalized in the last 10 to 12 years. What this means is that you do not only find corruption in some sectors, you find corruption in nearly all sectors of life. You find corruption in churches, is that true? You find corruption in civil society. Did people say yes? You also find corruption at home. All right. So we agree corruption is a problem. What corruption does is that it erodes public confidence. So if you're going to go into a public institution and you know there's corruption, you do not have confidence in that institution. And corruption also affects the economy. Where there's corruption, the economy does not function well. Because even if you are running a business, you are not competing fairly with those that are giving bribes. So the economy is affected because of corruption. Investment tends to be a challenge because investors see corruption as an added cost. When you want to get licenses in an environment of corruption, it means you need to have additional money in order for you to establish a business. But the magnitude of the problem of corruption is one that is subject to by different factors. So one person may say corruption is very high, another say no, corruption is not as high. We've heard politicians argue those that are in opposition that corruption is extremely high,
and those in government saying corruption is now under control. That is why we need to address the issue of how do we measure corruption. That's a key issue we're going to address here. How do you measure corruption? So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to go moving for me, or is the one moving? So measurement of corruption becomes extremely important. How do you measure? I'm sure Professor will did what he did. You have to measure. So the measurement of corruption has become a challenge. It's an old challenge, both with academics, but also those that are in the public policy space. How do we know that corruption is still rampant? How do we know whether corruption is reduced? That's the key question. When we talk about the CPI, we are talking of measurement. So whilst there are some forms of corruption like bribery and fraud, some types of fraud, which you can measure with a bit of accuracy, measure patronage. People know what patronage is? Patronage. So patronage is where those that are in political office, for instance, use their positions in political office to grant favors to those that support them. So they will use their opportunity to be in office to. How do you measure patronage? How do you measure use of power? How do you measure conflict of interest? They are very difficult to capture. But that's why we need to let them know what are measurements tool for corruption. So I go to the next slide. So we're talking about measurements. You can measure corruption using two ways. One of them is using hard data. Okay? So you want to know the corruption techniques. How many people have been arrested in year one, and how many were arrested in year two? And can we use the hard data to know that we're making progress? That's one way of measuring corruption. So if you're using hard data, you have to every year calculate the number of arrests, the number of convictions, the number of bribery or bribes. You want to have hard data for you to know whether you're making progress. The second approach is using perceptions. Professor already talked about this. Perception. Perception, we say, is everything. If people perceive you to be rich, you should be worried, isn't it? Or if people perceive you to be a slave queen, you should be worried. Why do they perceive me in a particular way? What is informing those perceptions? So typically, when it comes to corruption, we use perceptions by talking to experts who know the sector or the country on their perception of the existence of corruption. It may not be the hard data where they give you the actual numbers of how corruption is occurring, but they have the perception about the existence of corruption. So this is an important approach to capture information on topics that are very difficult to conceptualize. For instance, how do you measure public trust? That there's a loss of public trust. The loss of public trust in an institution. How would you measure that? It's very difficult. But you will focus on perception that there is a loss of trust. When we talk about shrinking civic space, again, there are elements of perception that they shrink in civic space because of a number of things that are happening. So we use perceptions to deal with aspects that are very difficult to measure, and we talk to experts. So in our case, when we talk about corruption perception index, we're using the second approach as opposed to the first approach. Your hard data is always not available. It's not available, it cannot also be reliable. For instance, not everyone reports cases of corruption. So if you're only focusing on the number of cases reported in a particular year, it doesn't give you a total picture of what the situation is. If you're looking at the number of convictions, the fact that you only have 16 people convicted in a year, for instance, does not mean that there's no corruption in that particular country. It could simply mean there's a lengthy process in the court of law for dealing with the issues of corruption. Are we together so far? Have I done something I think that's it? Thank you very much. This one? Okay. Wonderful. Now I don't have to shout. I was already losing my voice. So we've dealt with those two ways of addressing or measuring corruption. We go to the next slide. So keep this in mind. We are talking about two approaches, and the common approach that has dominated from the language is the one that is based on perception. So we use surveys, and again, I'm sure Prof. Malungu and others have talked about surveys. We use surveys in perception are related measurement. So Transparency International through the Global Corruption Barometer, which is another tool that we have, or the European Union through the Euro Barometer, are some of the examples where we talk to citizens about their perception of corruption. Whilst the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report captures the perception of businesses. So when a business is asked, do you think there is corruption in Zambia? They will give their views. Of course, the question will be structured differently, but generally the business community will be talked to find out, one, their perception about the existence of corruption. So the other way we measure corruption is through experiences. So you talk to people, there's something right there as index, for instance, talks to citizens to find out their experiences of bribery. And the question that are asked is whether they have been asked for a bribe, and if they have paid a bribe, why did they pay for that bribe, and what made them ready to pay the bribe. That's about experience. So you're still doing surveys in that particular instance. So go to the next slide. Now, with that in mind, what then is the CPI? So the CPI is a composite indicator. Those two words are important. It's a composite indicator. It's a survey of surveys. So with small countries, there are 180 countries that are on the CPI, and these are countries and territories from around the world, and we look at the perceptions of public sector corruption. So in fact, four words that are important at this stage: composite indicator, then public sector corruption, five action factors. So the schools that we look at reflect the views of experts and surveys from business persons, and not necessarily the general public. That's it. Okay? So where is the CPI coming from? From Transparency International, it was developed in 1997, and the reason why it was developed then was that TI was established at a global level in 1993. And one of the reasons why TI was established was there was this myth that you couldn't measure corruption. So international development organizations were not focusing on corruption, even in their development assistance. So they gave money to countries, even when they knew that corruption was right. Some countries like Germany made foreign bribery. So German companies bribing Zambian officials, they made such bribes tax deductible. So I could fit it in my tax returns that I gave money to the people in Zambia, and I get a tax rebate or tax relief on the basis of that. So TI now came up with to try and sensitize the general public on the seriousness of corruption. Our aim was to demonstrate that you could measure corruption. It cannot be a physical measure corruption, but you could measure corruption. And that was demonstrated with the CPI when it was started. And by the way, one of the main drivers for the development of the CPI was the young completed an economics doctorate. So he came up with the initial CPI, and we developed on the basis of that CPI. So for those that are interested, if you search for You also graph lambda stuff, you find a lot of work on the CPI from your. So if we go further, the next was controlling. So just to recap, super. Just to recap, we said the CPI is a composite indicator index. It's a survey of surveys. It is based on expert assessment, and this is a measurement of appetite corruption. We are all clear on that? Great. If we go to the next slide. Now let's look at what does the CPI capture and what does it capture. So the CPI captures issues of private, use of public office, private gain, nepotism, state capture, enforcement of integrity mechanisms, prosecution of corrupt persons, strength of anti-corruption laws, and the legal protection of whistleblowers, journalists, and investigators. Note that the CPI does not measure tax fraud, it does not measure illicit financial flows, it does not measure enablers of corruption. People don't know who the enablers of corruption are. How many are doing law in here? So lawyers, financial advisors are what we call enablers of corruption. Because if I want to set up a company in a tax haven or a secret jurisdiction like Luxembourg, I'll need a lawyer to set up that company, and I can move my money with financial advisors, etc. That's why we call it enablers of corruption. So money laundering is not measured, private sector corruption, as well as the informal economies and the markets. So if we go to the next slide. So this is what the CPI does not capture, but what is the methodology that we use? Remember, I said this is a composite indicator, meaning there are other indicators that we use to make this one indicator. So we use 13 external data sources. This is key. Transparency International does not carry out any surveys. We don't do any surveys. Not TI Zambia, not TI Georgia or TI USA. None of them just conduct any surveys. We rely on external surveys, which will include surveys done by the World Bank, surveys done by the World Economic Forum, surveys done by companies whose job it is to advise businesses who like to invest. And what we do ourselves is we collect that information and we calculate the weighted average and we standardize the scores from the different sources. We need information from the last 2 years. So for Zambia, for instance, when we talk about CPI 2023, the data is one that will go as far back as 2021. Are we clear on that? 2021, end of 2021, 2022, and part of 2023. But we cannot take the country if we do not have a minimum of 3 sources of information. And that is key. So we're not only going to use one survey, we need to use a minimum of 3 sources. The Corruption Perception Index uses a scale of 0 to 100. 100 is where the country is perceived to be very clean. 0 is where a country is perceived to be corrupt, highly corrupt. And the ranking is from 1 to 80. Remember I said you have countries, 180 countries. So once we do the score, we also do the ranking to see where the country is from. I go to the next slide. So that's the methodology. Now let's look at some items. Keep everything I've said in mind about what the CPI is, what it captures, the type of information we collect, who we talk to, and the coverage that we have. So the global highlights are as follows. In the 2023 CPI, we do note that 20 years after the adoption of the UN Convention Against Corruption, how many have heard of the UN Convention Against Corruption? How many have heard of it? Just heard of it, not even read it, just heard of it. Some hands are half past, people are not too sure. All right. This is the global convention which is supposed to be adhered to by all countries that have signed up. So the 190 countries are part of UNCA. And this is an effort to stop corruption around the world. But despite 190 countries being part of UNCA, what we notice is that 80% of the world's population lives in countries whose schools are below the low average of 43 out of the 100. Remember, 100 is what? Very clean, and 0 is highly corrupt. So we're talking about 80% of the country, the people living in countries where their schools are below 43. The global average is 43 out of the 100. In addition, the top 25 countries in the index just make up 10% of all the people. When you look at the top 25 countries, they just make up 10% of all the people. Therefore, we can conclude that corruption remains a challenge that is affecting all of us. Not just in Zambia or Africa, but internationally, corruption is a problem. All right? So if we go to the next slide, still talking about the global highlights. So in 2023, 28 countries improved on the CPI, improved in Zambia. However, 34 countries dropped on their scores of the CPI, whilst 118 countries stayed the same. They didn't make any changes on their CPI. So 2/3 of the countries continue to score below 50% out of the 100. And that is important. We are talking about 2/3 of the countries not doing enough to fight corruption based on the perceptions that in this year. To go to the next slide, still on the global highlights, and I've now moved to the regional highlights. But when you talk about countries that have made significant improvements statistically, some of them include Tanzania. Tanzania between 2015 and 2023 has improved by 10 points. Other countries like Cote d'Ivoire also have been improved by 8 points. But in the red includes countries in the north or western countries like Sweden, which has dropped the highest bar you see. Sweden has dropped 7 points on the score. So the problems are not just in Africa, the problems are everywhere. Turkey is dropping 11 points. So on the CPI shows that the problems are also with the countries in the northern hemisphere, just like there are problems in the southern hemisphere. We've got the next slide, and we now do some regional perspective. Let's do the top. So 11 countries. Number 1, Denmark. So in the corruption circle, when you hear people saying we want to go to Denmark, it means we want to move to where Denmark is in controlling corruption. Denmark, Finland, New Zealand have been top performers for the last 6 years. So 6 years in a row, Denmark, Finland, New Zealand. And the others include Norway, Singapore, and Ireland is among the top 11. But let's look at the bottom left. Or maybe before I do that, it is also important to mention that despite these countries being at the top, they also have their own challenges. Remember, I said the CPI does not measure illicit financial flows, for instance. When you now look at some of these top performers, and that's the next slide, you see trouble at the top. So the countries that are featured at the top of the index, like the Netherlands, have a poor record of prosecuting companies that bribe foreign officials. Just like Iceland also has challenges with corruption. Recently, Iceland was in the news because of the scandal in the fishing industry in Namibia. People have heard of the fish rod scandal. How many people have heard of the fish rod scandal? Again, in your spare time, just the fish rod scandal, since I'm told you have shares in Google. So group officials scandal, and you read everything about the corruption in the fishing industry and the role that Iceland played. So Iceland has not done enough to deal with corrupt individuals as well. But this is not the bottom performance. At the bottom are many countries that are in conflict. So you have Libya, and let me just start with Somalia, Venezuela, Syria, South Sudan, Yemen. If you know anything about these countries, you recognize that these are countries in conflict. These are countries where they do not have a functional government systems. And that is where the corruption is quite prevalent. We go to the regional focus now. So for countries that fall below 50, the majority of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, 90% of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa score below 50. And 6% in the Americas, you have 13% in Western Europe, and 95% in Eastern Europe. So the big areas of concern is Eastern Europe and Central Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. 90% below sub-Saharan Africa, 85% in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And as I said, you are intellectuals, and I'm sure, again, I'm seeing, just looking at all these intelligent people, I'm seeing research ideas bubbling heads, asking why is it that 90% of countries in sub-Saharan Africa are below 50, isn't it? And I'm looking forward to reading some of your dissertations telling us why that's the case. So let's move on to further regional insights. So if I take Western Europe and the European Union as a whole, they're so, but despite them doing very well, they kind of dropped for the first time. Previously, they were at 66, they've dropped by 1. Despite that, they're still one of the top performing regions. And again, but why? Why is it that they're performing well? They have institutions good enough. Of course, it may not be the best, but they are trying to build high trust societies. High trust societies. If you live in a low trust society, your notion of everything is that things will be stolen, isn't it? So you can't even leave the LCD projected. The notion is that we don't live in a high trust society. So that's the challenge. How do we live in a high trust society? We got the next region. Next region is Eastern Europe and Central Asia. You can see 35 out of 100 is the average. So the countries in Eastern Europe are a number of the former Soviet Union countries. Now I have to be careful since there are a lot of millennials. How many have heard of the Soviet Union? Just heard of the Soviet Union. Wonderful. So then you know all the history of the breakup of the Soviet Union. So a number of those former Soviet Union countries are in Eastern Europe, and now we combine them with Central Asia. So for Eastern Europe, there is a lot of dysfunctional rule of law, there's a rise of authoritarianism, and there's a lot of systemic corruption. Corruption in the institutions goes to the lowest level. That's why they're making that kind of lowest scores. Go to the next region. The next region is the Americas. So the Americas with Canada being at the top, and you've got so the regional average is 43%, but 2/3 of the countries in America score under 50. So there are still challenges in the Americas where it comes to fighting corruption, and some of the challenges include the lack of independence of the judiciary in the region. The next group is the Middle East and North Africa, 38 out of 100. So you're still talking about the United Arab Emirates being the top performer in this region, and the lowest performer is Syria, which has been at war for a number of years. So most of the countries in this region have failed to deal with corruption in countries. The next region is Sub-Saharan Africa. You know Asia Pacific? Ah, great. So Asia Pacific, with New Zealand being part of this, little to no meaningful progress, 45 out of 100. Some of the weak scores for this region reflect the lack of delivery by officials on anti-corruption agenda. So the lack of delivery of anti-corruption agenda affects many areas, not just Sub-Saharan Africa. But we're going to crack down on civil society. Okay. The next is Sub-Saharan Africa, 33 out of 100. This is group what? Group 4. What group would you place us if we were doing groups? So you guys are not doing groups. So Sub-Saharan Africa, 33 out of 100. The highest performer in our region is the Seychelles. So Seychelles is the first. Cape Verde or Cape Verde is the second. Then you have and Rwanda following thereafter, and Mauritius. Those are like the top 5. Seychelles, Cape Verde, Botswana, Rwanda, Mauritius, and Namibia. So those are the top performers. Somalia, South Sudan, and Equatorial Guinea. All right? So in our region, we still have persistent challenges stemming from severe underfunding of our public sector, weaknesses in the anti-corruption agencies around the region, while with illicit financial flows equally siphoning money from public service delivery. That's a regional perspective. Again, we wanted to ask questions. How do we build public institutions so that we deal with this challenge of corruption? To go to the next slide, that we're done with the regional highlights. The corruption watch normally develop corruption watch list. For Africa, 2 countries in particular are worrisome. Number 1, Gabon. Gabon scores 28 out of 100 against the decline. And you remember, this is a country which is rich in its natural resources, but was dominated by one family, the Bongo family. People know of Omar Bongo, who was president, then his son Ali Bongo took over, and he was overthrown recently from office. People know about Ali Bongo, and you remember how he was pleading for people to come and help him because the army were kicking him out. He didn't see him pleading. So Gabon has been problematic. For the last 5 decades, they've been dominated by one family, and we've seen a decline in transparency and accountability. South Africa clocks 30 years since the return or since the end of apartheid. And in 1994, there was a lot of hope that South Africa would usher in a new democratic era and it would deal with challenges of, say, corruption and other challenges that it has from a governmental perspective. But South Africa's CPI has been declining. And because of that, we have to watch what the results will be in the elections and whether the ANC will succeed as it has done in the past. Again, you as scholars would be interested to see whether this decline in the CPI, just corruption, the fight against corruption in South Africa, may affect the ruling party in South Africa. To go to the next slide, I'm almost coming to Zambia. In the thing for this CPI, we normally have a theme. This year, we're looking at corruption and the corruption and justice, issues to do with justice and judiciary. What we've noted is that countries with higher levels of corruption are less likely to sanction public officials for failing to adhere to rules and for failing to fulfill their responsibilities. So what this graph shows, it shows that if you plot the corruption perception index and government sanctions of officials, the majority of countries are on the bottom end. They are not doing enough to sanction those officials who are failing to adhere to rules. And that in itself is problematic. Why is it that they're failing to sanction officials that fail to adhere to existing rules. Go to the next slide. Under impunity standard, the issues of prosecution, again, it's floated, and you can read the full document when you go on the transparency webpage, www.transparency.org, and if you do /CPI, you find all the information on the CPI. So under most corrupt justice systems, the powerful and wealthy can escape from prosecution and conviction and equal treatment. Because the powerful can buy their way out, isn't it? And the poor to get the best lawyers. Isn't that the case? So they steal your money, then they go and get the best lawyers, and they get off the hook when taken to court. Isn't that the case? And the poor guy who steals the court, he can't even afford the lawyer pro bono, is jailed for 2 years. Is that fair? No, it's not. All right? So we are highlighting the impact that corruption has on the justice system. A couple of years ago, Transparency International did what we call corruption report, and in that particular year, focused on the judiciary. There's one statement that to this day is in my mind. A lawyer was asked, in fact, a corrupt official in East Africa was asked why he didn't hire a lawyer to represent him in court. And he responded, and why do I need to hire a lawyer when I'm a judge? So why do you have to hire a lawyer when you can just find a judge? So the corrupt always fight back. They'll find a way to gain their own freedom. To go to the next slide, I think we're coming closer to Zambia. So at the global level, a couple of recommendations have been made. One, we need to strengthen the independence of the justice system. In all countries, justice is important, and we need to strengthen the system. We need to make justice more transparent. We need to introduce integrity and monitoring within the justice system. We need to improve access to justice, and we need to expand avenues for accountability in grand corruption cases. But let's turn to Zambia now. Now that we've dealt with the global scenario, what about Zambia, the CPI for Zambia? So we go to Zambia. What were the results when it comes to Zambia? The next slide. That's a graph for Zambia. So it tells a story. Zambia has improved its score by 4 points in 2022. So from 2020 to 3,300 in 2022 to 37 out of 100 in 2023. So this is why we had government very excited. For the first time, we've improved by 4 points in a long while. But it's not 100%. So we're at a point where we should be. There's still a lot of work. But if you see the graph, in 2016, we scored 38 out of 100. In 2017, we dropped to 37 out of 100. Then in 2018, we fell down to 35 out of 100. We're now going down. 2019, 34. 2020, 33. 2021, we had hit rock bottom. Now, from 33 in 2022, we're up to 37. We can only hope that in 2024, for the CPI 2024, we can be touching 40 or even above 40. Or 50, why not? Even 50, all right? But even in terms of ranking, we've improved on our ranking by 18 points, from 116 out of 118 in 2022 to 98 out of 180. So there's been an improvement in the CPI, but we're not yet out of the woods. It's good news, but not very good news. We still have to ask ourselves, why can't we increase by even 10 points? What is it that we are not doing to continue to be perceived to be corrupt? Those are the questions we should be asking. So if we go to the next slide. Well, when we compare the performance with others, you'll know that Botswana for reduced by 1 point, despite it being number 3 in our region. So from 60, it's now down to 59. Rwanda increased, on the other hand, in terms of its performance. It has gone up by nearly 2 points, just like Namibia. Tanzania has gone up by 2 points. Namibia has maintained its score. South Africa, like I said, has dropped by nearly 4 points. And Zambia has increased on its ranking. So there's some good news. We would like to see Zambia hitting 50 pretty soon. Go to the next slide. But why has Zambia increased? Remember, we said 13 data sources. People remember that? For Zambia, there were 9 data sources. Although we ended up working with 8, because one of them, we had invalid results for the CPU. So those are the 9 data sources. So every time we have the government saying, oh, you know what, I want you to please look at the metadata, where is it coming from? So the African Development Bank carries out what they call a policy, country policy institution assessment. You know that from the African Development Bank perspective, Zambia went down by 2 points. Okay? The benchmark, the Stiftung Transformers Index, is the one that pushed Zambia really high. We went up by 12 points. Just like the Global Insight country ratings, also went up by 12 points. The Economist Intelligence Unit will maintain the same score, just like the PRS group and the World Bank. So the Zambia should be asking itself questions. Why is the World Bank thinking we haven't made any progress? Okay. World justice is the same. Then the varieties of democracy, which was in the news recently. People read about VDEM. We heard about government saying Zambia is one of the 3 countries that are democratizing. People read that. That's what we're referring to. We went up by 5 points. So this is where the changes are coming from. That's why we went up by 4 points. It's because of the results of these data sources. So if we quickly go through some of the data sources. Okay. So that's the African Development Bank. There's a distortion. So the African Development Bank assesses the accountability of the executive and the accountability of public employees within the executive on the use of public resources, but also the decisions and the results of the Now, we did not do well with the African Development Bank. We suggest 2 reasons. One, limited accountability of the executive to oversight institutions, and mainly because of a sluggish follow-up on the audit reports. Okay, so the African Development Bank, remember, the oversight institution, in this case, Parliament, makes a number of observations on the Auditor General's report, and the executive arm of government is supposed to follow up on those action points. And what the African Development Bank has noted is that it was limited follow-up. Next, it was a limited access of civil society and the media to information and public affairs. This happened before the information law. So the African Development Bank already picked this as a weak point. We go to the next data source, the Beltzman Stiftung Transformation Index. So they assess the extent to which public office holders who abuse their positions are prosecuted or penalized, and government ability to contain corruption by putting in place integrity measures. So one of the reasons, among the several reasons why this goes Zambia very well, is because they recognize the establishment of the Economic and Financial Crimes Court, as well as the existence of integrity mechanisms, gift policies, and service charters. All right? 2 more examples, and then I go towards the end. Next slide. So the Global Insights, which also had plus 12, it assesses the risk of individuals or companies facing bribery and other corrupt practices. So for them, they notice improvements, and this is also consistent with the work that Transparency International Zambia does together with the SEC through the Zambia Pride Index. How many have heard of the Zambia Pride Index? Just heard of it, the gentleman put up his hand very quickly. You were one of the research assistants. Ah, wonderful. We should share the money. Or you chewed everything. And you're still thinking. All right. So the next one. Okay. So the varieties for democracy, the +5. So varieties of democracy measures the pervasive levels of political corruption. Remember, there are various forms of corruption. In another lecture, we can go through that: political corruption, grand corruption, strategic corruption, legal corruption, state capture, all those, we can go through that. But in this particular case, political corruption is what they're focusing on. And they noticed that there was reduced political corruption due to the elevation of the fight against corruption. They believe that the new administration has elevated the fight against corruption. This is the analysis that DI did on the performance of the UPAD administration within the first 24 months. We noted that there's been a bit of elevation in the fight against corruption. Of course, more can be done, but something is happening to address corruption. All right, next slide. I think the economists, maybe let's go to the next one, so that then I start. All right, PRS group, which looks at issues of corruption in form of excessive patronage, nepotism, job reservations, exchange of favors, secret party funding, and suspicious close ties between politics and business. So for them, they noted limited action to address these aspects of corruption, particularly the CDF program in the procurement and in the recruitment of public sector workers. But they also noted that we do not have legislation to regulate political party funding. All right, next slide. Okay, I think let's go to, these are further examples of the data. Maybe just to mention, go one number. So on the World Economic Forum Executive Opinion, it was conducted between April and August 2023. However, only 91 countries had valid data for corruption-related questions. So the 13 data sources should have valid data for the countries that participate in the CPI. Because if we do not do that, then we distort the final weighted average. And I'm sure Prof. Malone will be the expert in that. He will tell you about all the errors that would come up if we had to take an incomplete data source. So that's why it was removed in the case of Zambia. So what are we recommending? We got the next slide. So on the basis of the CPR, one, we're saying government should accelerate the implementation of the access to information law. It's good to have it, it needs to be in place. Okay, this will make justice more transparent in terms of out-of-court settlements, and it will also allow for enforcement of all the decisions. Number two, the government should take action to limit excessive patronage and nepotism. This issue of job reservations, exchange of favors, secret party funding. We want to see a change in that. We need a law to regulate political party and campaign financing. And we need to promote merit-based appointments. That's what we say to government. Appoint people based on merit, not because of who they know in the system, but because they qualify to be in those positions. Further recommendations. We're saying government should accelerate corruption prevention, like whistleblowing protection. I'm hoping that even in UNZA you develop the whistleblower protection. We should have this declaration of access, interests, and liabilities for public officials in the public health systems, in regulatory agencies, in law enforcement, and in the court system. We need to have declaration of interests and liabilities. We should find avenues for accountability and grand corruption in order to reduce political corruption and the prevalence of bribery. And we believe that this can be done by strengthening the independence of the justice system and promoting cooperation among law enforcement agencies and stakeholders in the justice system. So, I'm sure if it was 12 students, they tell you that the next assignment will be the CPI to see whether people have understood anything about the CPI. But we're ready to take questions, comments, reactions. Madam Zan just had to do her job.
Okay, so we're going to take a few questions and then responses, and then if there are more questions, we'll take. So, how many people have questions? Any questions? Okay, so I've seen a hand there. Okay, so take 1, 2, 3. Anyone else before we get responses? And then we'll have some responses and another round of questions. So as you ask the question, ensure you introduce yourself. So you tell us your name, the course that you're taking, and then you can ask the question. Okay, I think we can take this question. Okay, so we can ask to the next round. So I'll do another one question. Then, yes.
My name is Vesena Kaze. I'm an economics major. My question is, you had mentioned that some of the forms of corruption that are mentioned that are measured using the CPI, and then there are some that aren't measured using the CPI. What form do we calculate for those? Because if you look at the corporate corruption, it's still a big factor, right? So what ways are you looking towards that to pick that up?
Okay, and then we'll take another question and then responses. Then another round. Natasha, for the question.
Good afternoon. My name is Natasha. A major in public administration is political science. My question is about the CPI. We've been doing them for several years, and you make recommendations each year. And the statistics show that there's significant improvement, but in the last, if I'm not mistaken, 10 years before the last 2023, there has been a decline in so what are you implementing things to be done to improve that?
Okay, thank you so much. So we have a round of responses just now. But I just want to encourage us to take this because you know, platforms like this, that you actually get opportunities for other things. You never know who's watching online or even just at an institution. We might be looking and interested in your assertiveness, and your creativity, your interest in the topic. So, show us your session as well. So we'll have some questions.
Well, the number of colleagues who can respond is even only when for instance, young lady, writers, so all these things, since I've been talking.
All right, okay. Questions that have been asked. One, two, is that the role of insurance and there have been things and documents. But we also have another interaction. We use the sharing is that so please feel free also to respond to the questions. But that's not yes, so insurance are very important way in fighting against corruption. And we have done it. So, of course, we are involved in that. So, we can policy, president, and frameworks that are going to improve the fight against corruption. And the example that you is the example that was mentioned. You will know that as states, you will know that as social we have advocating for the best part of and so this is an example of some ways in which education can actually contribute to the fight against corruption. And also research, which is another contribution that we to the fight against corruption. So as I mentioned about the Zambian reference, it's an example of research that different. Of course, it's not doing that, they're around, but also to give them the means and the ability to which they can actually engage their areas and ask questions, place accountability demands from their areas, whether it's the members of parliament, their councillors, and many other leaders. So those are just some of the examples that CSOs use to fight or to contribute to the fight against corruption. Thank you. I don't know who wants to go next.
Thanks so much. Maybe respond to the first question in terms of what measures this country are putting in place. Then I also touch on the third question, which was being, which looked at what can we do as a country for contribution. Then also the fourth one, which looked at business activities. So in terms of the previous one, I'll be quick because of time. When you look at these countries performing well, first of all, you need to look at the infrastructure as far as the fight against corruption is concerned. So we have got issues related to legal, policy, and institutional. Above all, we can also talk about social behavior. So when you look at, for example, these other countries, when it comes to access to information, law, they have had this law for a long period of time. When it comes to issues about political party campaign financing, they have got this piece of legislation for a long period of time. Even going back to the 2022 Corruption Research Index, it actually indicated that countries that have got this legislation relating to political party campaign finance are performing better than those that do not have. Allow me to move quickly to the third question that you asked in terms of when there's change of regime, there's always a distortion when it comes to the corruption. Let me indicate that since 2015, we had the first national corruption policy that we have and it actually came to an end when it expired in 2015. Since then, we have had no anti-corruption policy, not until last year, December, when it was approved by government. So one of the issues is actually lack of a roadmap or a policy that will guide the fight against corruption. This can be changed of the issue. So our hope is that this policy, perhaps even if the UPNG go out of the Olympics 2026, we still have a policy that will guide the institution that maybe quickly let me mention that that particular policy also guides the fight against corruption in terms of the measures and strategies that even NGOs actually. The last one in terms of corporate corruption, I'll speak for TIs. For TIs, of course, even ACC, the fight against corruption, I can say, mostly has concentrated on public corruption. But since 2022, we are actually directed bid for incorporating the private sector. So as Transparency International, we have different integrated framework as far as the corruption is concerned. This is actually a robust and comprehensive framework that indicates all the strategies that we can implement to ensure that also incorporate the private sector. Thank you so much.
Great. And I also wanted to mention that it might not be a question that you have, but it might also be a recommendation. So in terms of additional recommendations for us, that was very good. So we can have a second round of questions from you. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow, okay. So we have another round of questions. So let's take one of them. Well, you go next.
Thank you so much. It was very sense. Well, my question is, in this cooperative movement, we can clearly see that most of the people are engaging themselves in entrepreneurship. Now, in entrepreneurship, we can clearly see that able to make them exposed to corrupt cases, to make corruption. So, as Transparency International, how do you able to know such people to enable corruption?
One question. Why is it question?
My name is Moya, coming from the Studies Department, and I was the Vice President of the Studies. My question is from that was from 14 anti-corruption issues. My question is that this is evidence most of the women are content of compromising the institutions with one's project.
Is that what the level of free concerns become corruption? And if that's corruption, I think we
My name is Shepard. So my question is how to write a report that was made from the legislature. So in that report, we document the number of amendments that attributed to corrupt practices. And then we have seen the report from the corruption perception index to say that Zambia has improved straight from 37%. So I would like to get over into how is the case that the government attributed to say that there has been more and more on the corrupt case but we're having a different case on the corruption perception index. Then maybe the second thing is to gauge the transparency of international champion to a strong voice of calling out corrupt cases, more especially in the public institutions, and also the community itself. Because we have seen that cases that come in recent times, but if there is no voice that is pointing out this thing, then we will constantly have this agency and we are seeing that corruption that's my question.
Now, I don't want to go just to keep it clear one slow. That there is also holding is funded for all corruption. And these are people responsible for educating the public towards on the negative impact of corruption in the economic aspect, social aspect, and legal aspect. Now, my question is, what information are put in place to protect the peace of God and to promote transparency and accountability in the legal framework system? Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel. Measuring the findings of the research. What I have is not as a question. The first thing is that if corruption can be ended, how? If we as an individual, decide to be corrupt. So corruption can be mean and not with the other person. Secondly, I would also like to encourage the international to come up with measures that will protect whistleblowers. Last time we had a political anti-corruption who brought up different ideas and want to write rather being the upfront of in the big foundation of national sustainability of things that have to do with nation matters. Say, for instance, in the recent briefing that we had in the meetings that we did, if we had whistleblowers, people monitoring this process, corruption would have been avoided. Say, in the recent health recruitment, teacher recruitment, if we had people that were there, monitoring this process and ensuring that corruption was not there, corruption would have been avoided. So my main point is corruption can be ended if you as an individual, if I as an individual decide not to be corrupt.
Thank you so much. Let me share a program. Second is to understand international way of diplomacy. My question is, what is when the world takes up the nation in reports that we must ensure that this is I mean, you will psychological development, and something that starts to take your age. Obviously, we have to provide they can go and then research the practice. So, what is the self-information? because we are investing in some of the governmental principles. Thank you.
Okay, so we have the second last question and the last one. So, so how can we search from those loving already? So like what is being done in our life?
My name is Sam. President First question is whether his first position is making sure that other things uh, so, see as we see as a way that of course to help the issue, but the implementation is lousy and service terrible. So how does transparency work together with governments and of course other stakeholders seek to have this law implemented? How will you monitor the implementation of this law?
Let's start with let's start with the analysis first. Access to information needs to be operationalized. Access to information law. It says you can't integrate devices that you need to and it's important because the government has to place infrastructure for you to be able to use that information more effectively. So I want to advocate for that to quickly operationalize that information. So we're going to same law with work that we do over the years, so that the law doesn't just understand that is being used. And we'll also participate and ensure that demonstrate in sensitizing the public about this law so that we can test academic opportunity. Raising what can students do? The opportunity to the anti-corruption related also required to control. Yes, very strict on doing that. We need to do more at the tertiary level, education level, and we did all the challenges. How we work with investment structures so that we avoid not just have corruption related material, but ethics, education, in the training and the movement, that profession in the future. So it's still going to be done at the quality of university level. But what we're doing as still coming out here talking to you is part of the work of ensuring that we build a cadre of executives who are really active on integrity. That is the thing. If we find ourselves possible, we should lose the agriculture. Otherwise, then we will lose the entire society. Corruption, I think the question is about integrity. So you can fight corruption using the enforcement of the law. That's what we call the enforcement of the law, and deal with the principal agent model and the whole but as limitations, we now know how we build the right behavior is so we build it, and that's the point that you're raising. We don't think I don't know what it was corruption, but I just find this is that's exactly what we're talking about. So how do you measure if it was corruption in the process? And again, I think that is something that we'll have to talk about. Legal protection of whistleblowers. The Public Interest Exposure Act of 2010 is all about protection of whistleblowers. So if you think of the Public Interest Exposure Act, it's all about whistleblowers. Of course, there are challenges in the which will be asked for amendments to ensure that whistleblowers are protected. Just in the export of launching an online anonymous whistleblower platform. Check on the website for the SEC. We have launched an online platform where you can anonymize as a whistleblower and I will go the whistleblowers on the so the more making progress in that regard. The Auditor General anomalies, just because the Auditor General does not say, the corruption is working well because of corruption. So you are in the funds needs so the General has this obligation. It's called disapplication. It's for the number of which can just try to be corruption, but it's still used to address. So we just look at those but not all changes that we have to the CPR of those changes. So I'm trying to fix that when you have some changes, but not being anticipated in the CPR results. 5 months of investigation, no. It is 5 months after the investigation. So it's supposed to be 5 months after the investigation and the process starts in court, it should take 5 months. Why is that important? If you've got cases that have taken 20 years, people know that the Supreme Court recently held to the case. 20 years and justice is just right. You can't make it right for 20 years. So you want to ensure that the cases are quickly dealt with and brought to their logical conclusion. Of course, as we are watching this very carefully to ensure that the quality of the judgments and the entire judicial process is not compromised. But we think that within enough rules and enough capacity, is a right to ensure that cases are addressed in the right manner. Thank you very much. Pressure to raise one question. Sorry, I didn't know something. So, talk about the report which has the and I know a lot of people about what is the education, this rights, but the CPI is saying that so the simple, I think, straightforward answer would be that there is a significant difference between the illicit financial flows and what we are measuring in the CPI when it comes to corruption. So the CPI, we have not included illicit financial flows. So maybe you don't understand what illicit financial flows are. Yes, we can be generated from corruption, but it can also be generated from trade-based transactions. Where so what outside. So it is possible for us to have a right information because the CPI does not include IFS signature. So there's an online audience. There's one question from Mr. Patrick Nkoma. From such online engagements and participating, it is obvious the problem of corruption are just presented in the iceberg form. Now we're hearing of global economic corruption, state action, and so on. Meaning the international corruption straight is yielding results. That said, why is it difficult for some corrupt officials to be dealt with? Well, I think the simple answer is corruption is getting complex by the day. We have seen new forms of corruption, economic and financial crisis, and crisis. And therefore, we always say that once we are planning this corruption, the corruption is not to the work in the most expensive. The advent of technology has made it possible for corruption to happen in new forms, and we therefore need to adapt. But one is some corrupt people be consistent. Like I said, the corrupt fight back. The corrupt don't just sit idle. They get a busy lawyers. They leave the they grab everyone who can give them that freedom. So it's a question of always the right resources as well. Invest in the fight against corruption. Are we investing in the fight against corruption? Probably not. We need to do more. Yes, allocation of funds to anti-corruption provision and development. But more needs to be done. The anti-corruption commission just under 400 or slightly above 400 for the entire country. 400 over 20 million. It's not possible that there will be everyone in the offices in all the 160 districts of this country. So we need to do a little bit more. How many judges do we have? We have enough judges to deal with the ever-increasing challenge of fighting corruption. Are we deploying the right technology to do forensic data analysis? Are we doing enough to invest in technology? So more needs to be done, and that is why we continue to see all this challenge. Are we doing the right part? We have one right part we can even do better. As a different challenge we have, we can do more. We shouldn't sit on the laurels and say we are not. Let's keep our eyes on 50 for next year. Let's keep our eyes on 60 for this very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ifika, for that comprehensive presentation. We are now going to have, because now we are nearing the end of the lecture, we're going to have a vote of thanks from the Anti-Corruption Club President, Ms. Natasha. We can take for more
on behalf of the University of Zambia Anti-Corruption Club and student activists, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to Transparent International Zambia, to the people of humanity for the invaluable contribution. The Public Administration Corruption Perception Index and implications for Zambia, although not enlightening, but also deeply impactful. We are immensely grateful for the our awareness of the challenges for corruption in our nation. Your dedication to promoting transparency, accountability, and integrity steps in the beacon of work our collective for corruption. I would extend our special appreciation to all of you who have attended this event and grace us with your presence. the art of participation and engagement underscore our shared commitment to combating corruption and fostering a culture of ethical leadership and governance. As we reflect on the lesson from today's lecture, let us reaffirm our resolve to uphold the principles of honesty, integrity, accountability in all aspects of our lives. Remember, the corruption-free Zambia started. Thank you once again, President, and everyone present here today for your ongoing support and dedication. Together, let's try to remove the corruption.
Thank you so much, Nakashi. Now we're going to have closing remarks from Mr. Adam Braga, who is our inspiring international Zambian editor.
Close our lecture today. Yes, let me return to the University of Zambia through Mr. who was the president. And let me also take this opportunity to thank the audience which made this activity taking place. Let me also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Ibuka. I think the presentation is thought-provoking, looking at how the education looking at how the weapon has so much sensitivity, and others because of that, they will not be able to ask questions. As we think about this room, I think let us take the three parts. The first part is for us first to resist the temptation of being corrupt and treating of corrupting others. The second part is the reject corruption. It's for us to be the corruption. We try to impose the real governments. If we do that, we participate in the fight against corruption. This would thank you so much for your participation. I say, keep it up. I think this will be the last time to come here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So, just a quick minute. You haven't signed the form that was passed through, please sign it. So just as you have your group, and you can be sending more information and updating on the any future events. Can you please have a close prayer? So someone volunteer. Yes.
Eternal Father, Almighty God, we pray for the most time. We are thankful that your divine presence has been with us while we have this meeting to talk about corruption. Indeed, dear Father, even you is not the Lord of corruption. You are God who wants peace and unity to endure. I pray now that whatever we pledge today stick into our hearts, that we will not be corrupt as we go out there. Let us be the advocates of change. Let us be the people that will make this Zambia to be a changed nation. We are thankful for these our leaders and the people that you put in front of us, the transparent nation of Zambia that fight corruption. May you continue to bless them. Make sure that they endure so that they do things that are more productive to our nation. May you bless us all. May you bless our nation, Zambia. For it is our prayer in Christ Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Okay, thank you so much. So, a representative from the representative is just going to give a logistical.
Such circumstances. And then we know when mobilizing agencies are going to be snaps, but unfortunately,
they didn't budget for that. So we were asked for apologies concerning that. So we're very sorry. But shall we go back over the plan?